Hey everyone, welcome back to Reason and Theology, joined by Dr. Owen Anderson. He's a professor at Arizona State University. He's also a pastor, Princeton and Oxford speaker, father of four, and also jiu-jitsu instructor and perhaps master. I don't know. Maybe you could tell me how that works. I'm really excited to talk about that as well. Welcome to the show.
Yeah, I'm really glad to be here. Thanks for having me.
Yeah, it's an absolute honor. That jujitsu part really caught my attention too.
Yeah.
Whenever I saw your profile and bio
Oh, yeah.
online, I thought, oh wow, this is interesting because I think you also connected to spirituality and how it impacts
Yeah.
your daily life. And so I'm excited to talk about that as
Yeah,
well. But
absolutely.
first, I want to dive into the situation right now between yourself and ASU and some of its DEI policies. Tell me what exactly
Yeah.
is going on there.
Yeah. So ASU in 2023 sent all of us faculty an email saying you need to take our required employee training called Inclusive Communities. And so we have different kinds of employee training. We have to do training on internet security, on fire, whether there's a fire in the building, on reporting abuse. So it's not surprising to get that email. But as I got into the actual training, I realized this is DEI training. It has a whole module called DEI.
Oh wow.
And the actual content gets into race blame. That the big problem in our world is what they call whiteness and heteronormativity. And that our culture, our country, United States, is a racist, white supremacist country. And so I fundamentally disagree with this, and it doesn't help me at my job. It's not necessary information. So I started a Substack just talking about this stuff because I thought the public needs to know this is what ASU is training your professors to do. And in the middle of that, I got contacted by the Goldwater Institute, which is a legal firm that is like ADF, but ADF focuses on religion for the First Amendment, whereas Goldwater focuses on government overreach. So sort of a libertarian group. So they said, yeah, this is illegal. Would you like to take them to court over it? And I said, yeah, absolutely. So it violates an Arizona law that prohibits race blame in state-funded education. So you can't say something like, the problems on our world are due to white people. That's the definition of racism, right? So that lawsuit started last year at this time, and we're still in the middle of it in the sense that, Goldwater, my side, gives our case. Then ASU actually hired Perkins Coie. Do you know who that is?
I'm not familiar, no.
That's one of the largest law firms in the country, super left-leaning. They're the ones that Hillary Clinton hired to do that whole Russian dossier thing.
Gotcha.
So they're on that side of the political spectrum. I mean, not even like left of center, way out there. Very powerful. Just 2 weeks ago, President Trump rescinded their security access. So they're at the level of they're a law firm that has security access to the United States government. And so they started the court case by saying Anderson doesn't have standing to bring the case. So we went through about 8 months of that argument. They lost that. The judge said, of course he does. And so then they appealed it, which is where we're at right now. We both have our arguments before the appeals court. And then I'm thinking that whoever loses that will take it to the Arizona Supreme Court, which will be great. I'm looking forward to that because what happens next is ASU's administrators get put under oath.
Okay.
So from their side, what they did was they said, we don't have any DEI training. We don't know what Professor Anderson's talking about. Well, there's a little problem there, though, called screenshots. So that's why I started on my Substack. I just started saying, you mean you don't have the DEI training that says DEI right here? So then they said, well, but it doesn't engage in race blame. Again, screenshots, you mean the part right here where it says whiteness is the problem and our country is a white supremacist country? Not that's what some people think. They ask you to believe it is. And so that's where it steps over the line. So when they're under oath, they won't be able to play those games.
Yeah. Well, are they playing games or are they that ignorant about the people they're defending? Do you think
well, that's
that
what I wanted to give the benefit of the doubt because I always want to give the benefit of the doubt when I can. I mean, I've been bitten sometimes on that, so I might get a little more, a little hardened, not too much, but especially at the highest levels, this might have been done like 3 levels down.
Wow.
And they didn't get briefed on it. So 3 levels down, they pushed out this required training. And then there's some level of kind of saving face because the spokesperson who's saying what I just told you, the spokesperson who says, we don't have DEI training. yeah, maybe they didn't know about it. That's true. But at the next level, everyone will know what's going on.
Yeah.
And the sad part is, though, even if they didn't know about it at the highest levels, they could have said, yeah, you're right. This got brought to our attention. It steps over the line. We're going to stop this and
Yeah.
reevaluate our approach. And that would have gotten them out of the news. It would have saved them. I mean, how much does Perkins Coie bill by the hour? Right?
Exactly.
Of course, they want to say Anderson doesn't have standing, even if they think they're going to lose that because they just got another 100 hours of billing.
Why do you
So
think they want to fight it so aggressively when there's this kind of damning evidence against them?
yeah, that I've been trying to figure that out just in the sense of putting myself in their position.
Yeah.
Arizona State University is the largest university in the country, state university in the country. And we want to attract students from many other places of the country in order to continue growing, keep our budget up. So I don't want negative news. If I'm in charge, I want only positive news. And so the way to get this out of the news is by making it go away. And what does ASU gain by having it? Very little.
Yeah.
What harm is done to their reputation by fighting it? A lot.
Yeah.
So I don't understand how that calculus works out. The only thing I can think of is that you got one guy, me, among the thousands of faculty, speaking up as a conservative. If ASU does come out against DEI, all the other, 10,000 faculty are up in arms. So it might be.
I was
kind of
about
like,
to ask you. Wow, they have that many faculty?
Oh yeah, we're huge. I mean, I see different numbers. I've seen up to 180,000 students, or 150,000. We're like I said, we're the largest state university, and what our president has wanted to do. He's been here for 25 years. Is he's wanted to combine excellence with access, which I'm all in favor for. In other words, usually when you think of a big university, you think of low quality university. So he's worked to try to reverse that. And we've got a lot of really good programs, number one ranked programs. So in terms of that mission, I'm okay with that. But what happens is access gets put in, the word that's used instead is inclusion, which is still fine, until what it means is you include some people more than others based on skin color. Now say, wait, that's literally the definition of racism.
Yeah. What do the other faculty members and professors think about this? Do they have any of them stepped up and said, yeah, this is out of line?
I have received some personal emails of people who said, I don't feel like I can say anything publicly, but thank you for doing this. It hasn't been a big number, but it's been enough to be noticeable. But the thing is that when you go through your career to become a professor, you're a tenure track professor. I have to explain this for your audience because anybody who teaches like a part-time class at a community college will tell their family, I'm a professor. But the word actually means research professor is something that happens to you about 20 years into your program, your career. So you start off as an assistant professor in a tenure track job. You get 6 years to prove yourself, so to speak. In the 7th year, you're reviewed. And then if you pass that, you get tenure, which means you can't be let go for any of your research. Any of the topics you pursue are guarded to protect freedom of inquiry. And so then some people stop there. It's called associate professor. But if you continue to show excellence, with about 6 years later, could be longer, you go up for what's called full professor. And so then that's kind of the final stage, unless you get some kind of honorary chair. And so people would like to get to full professor, but there's ways that you can be kept out of either tenure or full professor without the committee explicitly breaking the rules. But if you come into it and you know, oh, you're that conservative guy, well, maybe your research over here doesn't look as good as you thought it does. So I'm a full professor. I can speak up and I'm not worried about rank, but others may be thinking to themselves, man, I will in the future, but right now I just can't.
Okay. Wow. Okay. Well, that's very helpful. So
Sorry,
that
one
definitely,
quick, I don't interrupt, but one other thing that I realize is that's the formal side. There's the social side. When you're a professor, you get invited to the wine and cheese parties to chat with the others and have intellectual discussions.
sure.
That all goes away when you're known as the conservative.
Yeah. So you're kind of the black sheep now. Is that?
Yeah, I'm not on the list for those.
You're not on the list anymore. You're
All
gonna
of the
miss out on the
tolerance
cheese.
and diversity and interest in different opinions goes away immediately when you're a conservative.
Yeah. No, I'm sorry to hear that you're going through that, but I'm glad that you are fighting against this. It sounds certainly like a worthy endeavor. And wish you the best of luck in
Well,
this
yeah, I thought
ongoing
about, like, I'm a
case.
philosopher. If I
Yeah.
didn't speak up, I'd have to give back my Socrates card, right? Because this is kind of what philosophers do, right? If you don't bring up problems and, hey, Athens, you're not being wise, then yeah, what are you doing as a philosopher then? Solving logic problems or something?
That's a good point. And actually, that's another thing that I want to talk to you about before we dive into the question of a woke society and how to engage it effectively. I want to talk to you about philosophy and rational arguments, especially from the angle for the existence of God. I mean, we see society very, very secular, especially here in the West. Many people are atheists or agnostics, and they feel that belief in God is outdated, it's irrational. As a philosophy professor, you know better. You know that there are very good,
Yeah.
cogent, rational arguments for the existence of God. Can you maybe familiarize the audience with some of those arguments?
Absolutely. And I actually take it a bit further. My earliest work, my first published book, was on what I call the clarity of God's existence. So I go further than just saying there's some good arguments that could persuade some people,
Hmm.
to saying you're intellectually and morally obligated to believe in God, so that unbelief is without excuse. There's no
Yeah.
intellectual or rational excuse. And I'm also specific about what we mean by God, not just kind of a general higher power or even the unmoved mover, but God of theism, who's infinite, eternal, and unchanging in things like power, knowledge, and goodness. So I think that you can demonstrate those, or those are clearly revealed to us in creation, or in
Mhm.
theology, it's called general revelation. So I take it a step further than the normal sort of, come on, Richard Dawkins, there's this argument or this argument, to saying, actually, Richard Dawkins, you're in sin.
Mm.
Atheism is a sin. And it's a sin because it has no rational excuse. And
Mm.
unfortunately, I haven't seen that argument pressed a lot. It's what we find in Romans chapter 1, verses 18 through 21, really 18 through the end of the chapter,
Yeah.
is about that point. But I think that apologists need to be very bold about that, and Christian philosophers are very bold about that. When you read the Westminster Larger Catechism on the first commandment, it lists the sins the first commandment forbids. So the first one on the list is atheism. And that doesn't just mean materialism, that's included, but any kind of rejection of God, which
Mm.
could be deism, it could be pantheism, it could be polytheism. Any one of those really is technically atheism. And
Mhm.
so I think it's incumbent on us as Christians to be able to show unbelief is without excuse. And that requires using reason and argument. So that's kind of my preface into the arguments.
And concerning that preface, are you coming from more of a presuppositionalist perspective, or is this classical theism and apologetics for belief in God? Where would you be categorized there?
Yeah, I use arguments from both. And I know
Oh,
there's some animosity between them. So it's, they want to say pick a side. But
yeah.
the transcendental argument is a good argument when it's used correctly. The first example we have in the history of philosophy is in Aristotle, actually. He
Hmm.
uses a transcendental argument to prove the law of non-contradiction. You don't
Mm.
prove the law of non-contradiction directly. You prove it because if you don't use it, you can't make sense of anything else. I think that's the correct use of the transcendental argument. I think if you jump right into the Trinity and say you must presuppose the Trinity to make sense of anything else, it's a lot is in there. You got to unpack that a lot more compared to just the law of non-contradiction. But then at the same time, what Paul says in Romans 1 is the eternal power of God.
Hmm.
And so I think that's the question that really every religion starts with, is what is eternal? What's existed from eternity? And when we look at that, I think you'll see what I'm describing are classical arguments to show that, for example, the material world can't have existed from eternity, which the pagans believed. Aristotle believed it did. It was eternal. So that's why it's a
Right.
little bit difficult to use Aristotle, because what he speaks about is not God the creator. And so Aquinas on that point said we can't even prove by reason that the creation had a beginning. We need the Bible for that. And I don't think that's
Right.
correct. I think we can show from general revelation clearly the material world had a beginning. And then the other big one is my own soul, because the major religions of the world, we mostly think in terms of like maybe Greek philosophy, But even Plato thought you pre-existed your body and perhaps indefinitely existed and you're reincarnating. And so the teaching in religions like Hinduism is that you have existed from eternity. And enlightenment is when you come to realize that. And so you need to also be able to show that that's not true. You also had a beginning. So I think once you've done those two things, if you've shown something has existed from eternity, it's not the material world, it's not me. When you start to fill in, well, what is it? Then you get to theism.
And this it sounds like it's very much related to the argument from contingency. Is that correct?
Yeah, I think one, especially with the material world, an essential feature of the material world is that it changes.
Mm-hmm.
And so you simply show whatever's changing can't have existed from eternity. What's eternal? The incommunicable attributes of God go together. What's eternal is also infinite and unchanging. You can't pry those apart, which is what all forms of atheism try to do. They try to say there's something changing, but maybe it existed from eternity, which is logically not possible. But you have to show that.
And the way that it is, it's not necessary for it to be that way. So that there is something, there has to be this necessary being that puts it into act, if you will. Is that a good way to express that?
Yep. Yeah, well, the contingency argument is that a few different versions. If something changes, why?
Yeah.
Why did it change that way? It was changed by something before it. And I point out that every child is born a philosopher in this sense, because they'll ask their parent, hey, where does ice cream come from? I say, well, it comes from milk. Oh. Where does milk come from? Well, it comes from a cow. Oh. And you know what's next? Where's the cow come from? Right. And so our minds naturally say, well, what the answer you just gave me, it also had a beginning. And so our minds are naturally looking for what had no beginning. And so that's kind of the contingency one. The necessity one, you're right. You described that as well, too, that there is a necessary being to explain change. So I think those kind of all orbit the same idea, which is that there must be something that existed from eternity. There can't have ever just been absolutely non-being and then being. There must have always been being, but specifically eternal being. What is that? And so the various forms of atheism generally posit some changing being has always existed.
I love how you're also pointing this out, that we know intuitively that there must be a God, and you point to the situation with kids. I recall when I was a kid, not only did I ask those questions like ice cream and then milk and cow and all that, but I would ask questions like, okay, that wrecked truck on the road, how do they clear that out? Well, they get a bigger truck to come and get it. Okay, well, how do they clear that one if it's wrecked? Well, they get a bigger one. And I would keep saying, well, wait, I don't think you can infinitely have just bigger trucks to come and get these things. Yeah, I think we all just kind of know intuitively.
That's a great example of it. Yeah. I think that's what it means. Eternity is in our hearts. I don't think we're consciously aware of the propositions involved in theism, but I think we are initially aware of the concepts involved. So a proposition is when you put concepts together, like God is eternal, but the concept of eternity, we have that in us. Even if at first we're not consciously aware of it, it gets brought out by the kind of questions you're showing us. And we wonder, what is that? And that's what, Augustine and Descartes both try to unpack, like, how could I, a finite being, have the idea of eternity? That's amazing. Maybe there's a proof for God's existence just in that, they both said. And so, that's the idea that we wonder that. I used to show that there was this, The Onion, the college humor.
Yes.
I think they've been surpassed by the Babylon Bee. I don't see them as much
right
anymore.
Yeah, they're more.
The Onion had this great fake documentary, just like a 5-minute long video, but it's about how researchers taught an ape how to think.
Okay.
And right away, the ape became super depressed and was concerned about its own death. Okay. And that's really what it would be like if something began to think. Like in reality, what people said they did was they taught an ape named Coco to say, I want a Pepsi. But if Coco is really thinking, Coco would reason the way we just did. Well, wait a minute.
Right.
Both into the future, things die. What will happen in my soul? Like Coco would immediately become a philosopher. And so we don't see that happening. But I use it as a humorous skit in my classes just to show when you're a thinker, you automatically start wondering this stuff.
That reminds me of something Mortimer Adler said, a philosopher. Yeah. He said in the last chapter of one of his books that one of the ways we know that we're unique and that we alone are able to rationalize is we alone have culture, we have religion, we have art, but animals don't have that. And that's a fundamental difference between us. I thought that was an interesting argument. It
No, I
sounds
think
like
that's right.
that's
I
what
mean,
you're saying here.
you can't basically trying to stop thought is like trying to hold back a waterfall. Like you're standing under it, you're trying to hold it back. Like once you can think, all this stuff pours out of you. And so I think that could be unpacked into an argument against evolution of the soul.
Mm,
There's a
mhm,
difference in kind from the animal to the human, not just a difference in
mm,
degree. Because once you
mhm.
start a little bit of thinking, all the rest comes. And it's interesting because the evolutionists recognize that. They all try to find some mystery that happened. There's a group of apes. Remember Space Odyssey 2001?
Yes, yes.
Group of apes, and then a magic obelisk from space falls. And when you touch it, you start thinking. And that's the materialist explanation. Like where thought came from was from some obelisk that fell from space. Basically, it was an ancient aliens answer, but I think he should have pushed it further out because I think that my students don't know about Space Odyssey 2001 because 2001 came and went, and we're not exploring Jupiter, so no one thinks that was a good prediction. But the idea, though, I always bring out like what would make you go from all you think about is eating and mating to start to ponder the heavens, right? Well,
Mm.
that's a change in kind. So you're right. And once you do that, Mortimer Adler quote's perfect because once you start thinking about that, you start developing art, culture, philosophy, literature.
How do you avoid the God of the gaps fallacy here, though? Because I'm sure an atheist would just say, okay, well, even if we don't know how we became rational, even if we don't know how we made that step, it doesn't necessarily mean God. It doesn't necessarily mean eternity. It doesn't necessarily mean that we're unique. And maybe we just don't know the answer. What would you say in response to that?
Yeah, well, that's 100% true. In other words, I would distinguish between empirical gaps and logical gaps.
Mm,
So because Christians have sometimes blurred those, the empirical scientist is nervous about it. And so we do need to look into the empirical and not fill an empirical gap with that. I would call that the secondary level of causes. God creates the world and it has laws. And so what
mhm,
we're studying in science is we're really studying those laws and how they apply to the changes that we see. And so
right,
when you do that, that's simply empirical. You're
right.
breaking down, the world around you. But then there's the primary cause of all things, which is God bringing the world into being, creating those laws, sustaining it in existence. And so when you appeal to changes in kind, like going from not existing to existing, that's not an empirical thing. Um, Both Stephen Hawking and uh, was it Richard Dawkins? No, Lawrence Krauss came out with a book around the same time about how the universe came from nothing. And they both said something similar, which is because laws exist, they created the universe from nothing. And so, well, wait a minute. Laws don't just exist by themselves.
Right.
They're laws of something that exists.
Exactly.
So they were both unfamiliar with Platonism. They were kind of like blindly trying to find Platonism as scientists. They hadn't heard about Plato before, but they were trying to get to the idea of eternal forms and
Right.
changing matter. And they just didn't take a history of philosophy class or didn't pay attention. But as materialists, they also probably were prohibited from fully embracing Platonism. Although I think Richard Dawkins may be a kind of Pythagorean when you look into it.
Mm.
Numbers are eternal, not matter. So that kind of stuff, they recognize there has to be something eternal, and it's numbers or it's the laws. But again, those are logically not able to do what you think that you're saying they do.
Yeah, fair enough. And I've seen some of them try to say, well, it's a multiverse, right?
Mhm.
So we, the way we explain everything in this universe is there's actually a multiverse that put this one into motion, and obviously that just pushes the problem back one step further,
Yeah,
right? But you still have the same problem there, and I
yeah.
don't think I've heard any responses to the
No.
multiverse deal at
Well,
that point.
it's a fundamental confusion of the difference between possibility and actuality.
Hmm.
So it grows out of logicians in the 60s and 70s saying, like David Lewis, whatever is possible is actual in some other universe. And so it's curious to say, well, wait a minute, that's not what possible means. Possible means it isn't actual, but it's contingent. So if other things were different, it might have happened. And so then I think from that work in logic, some scientists picked up that and said, yeah, maybe there's this thing everything that could happen does happen in some universe, and that's the multiverse. And so there's different versions of Spider-Man because he had different upbringings or something, and that's one example of the multiverse. But yeah, that's just fundamentally mistaking possible and actual. Those are different logically.
Here's my response to the multiverse deal. So if everything that is possible is actual in some other, part of the multiverse, then you would at some point have some kind of universe where they figured out a way to penetrate all of the multiverses and communicate to all of us simultaneously and make us aware that there is a multiverse.
Yeah,
That hasn't been done. Ergo, some
it
things
is
that are
possible. Right?
possible aren't actual. So
I like it. Nice. Yeah, that's a good one because, and I think that's I'm ashamed to admit I know the Marvel story, but I think that's the bad guy in the Ant-Man Quantum
yeah,
movie,
man.
who is then the bad guy in the Loki Time TV
Uh-huh.
show. What's his name? I'm forgetting, but
I don't
he
remember.
did
I've
that.
seen the
He
movies, but I don't remember.
Kong the Destroyer, I think. He broke through all the multiverses. He gathered up all the versions of himself, and then I think he tried to kill all of them so he'd be the only one who's Kong the Destroyer. So anyway, they play around with that stuff, but I think you've got a good argument there. And I also like your previous argument about pushing things back one
Mhm.
doesn't help. And that also applies to the obelisk from space or the ancient aliens story. And Richard Dawkins is on record saying, I don't believe in God. Well, where life come from? An alien planet. Well, wait, now you've got two problems. Life
Huh.
here, how do you explain us? And life there, where'd they come from?
He posits aliens?
Yeah, there's a documentary called Expelled
Huh.
about evolution of public school, and he's
I
interviewed a
remember
few
that,
times
yeah.
in it. The interviewers, what's his name? I should remember it. He's the guy from Ferris Bueller who says Bueller,
Yeah. Yes.
Bueller.
I remember
That guy. I mean, he's a kind of intellectual. He was in the Nixon administration. He did some movies, but he was the interviewer for this. And yeah, he asked Richard Dawkins, so where does life come from? Aliens. Now the problem that he runs into is that the universe, in his claim, is the universe only has so much time. Let's say 15 to 20 billion years. And so if there had to be a super advanced race that mastered space travel to plant us, it's not clear he has given us enough time to develop that on his model, let alone the problem of world where they come from.
Mm. I have one more follow-up question before we move on to the woke topic. So,
Yeah.
what have you found to be the most effective, or at least your most favorite argument, whenever you're having conversations with atheists about the existence of God?
Mhm. Yeah, I think the thing that, and actually, I'm glad you brought this up because it reminded me of something I thought of earlier.
Mhm.
So the first to quickly answer your question is epistemology. How do
Mhm.
you know? And guys like Richard Dawkins are just naive realists. Well, because I see it. And that's like, oh, good. That's philosophy 101, day one. Right? You
Yeah.
don't know anything
Yeah.
because you see it. So all of those leading scientists would just stumble at this point, let alone just kind of the normal scientists or materialists you meet. None of them can show the material world even exists.
Right. Yeah. This is kind of going back to Kant, right?
Well, Kant, and I mean, I think philosophical Hinduism is
Mhm.
much more sophisticated than the Western versions of materialism. So that's why a lot of these guys, I mean, almost every leading scientist in the 20th century was a Hindu or a Taoist. Like the movie on Oppenheimer brought that out about him. He learned to read Sanskrit in order to read the Vedas. And this is true for Schrodinger and the other, they started reading the Tao Te Ching or something and Lao Tzu, and they just become mystics because they realize, yeah, their empiricism is no basis for knowledge. So I think that's the first thing to point out is that you don't even know what you're talking about, literally, not just in the practical sense, but you can't even show that the things you see in front of you exist outside of a mind,
Yeah,
let
because
alone
everything's coming through that process, that filter of the mind. The analogy I heard, it's kind of like your brain is a freezer. The only time it has to go through water has to go through that freezing process. So you only know as a freezer, water has basically frozen. You don't know it how it is outside of the freezer kind of thing. And so you don't really know knowledge or what is outside of yourself unless it's already been filtered through your mind. But how do you know that what your mind knows is the same as it actually is out there?
yeah. So
Is
that,
that kind of the idea?
yeah, exactly. And I kind of break it down in terms of the thing you're seeing, let's say a computer, the light waves that bounce off the computer to go into your retina, because you never see or interact with the computer, right? The computer doesn't come into your retina. Light waves do. And then the light waves are turned into neural impulses in your brain. And neural impulses don't look like computers. We can open up your brain and look around. There's no computers inside your brain, no computer-shaped neural impulses in your brains. And so you tell me that you see a computer. You don't see a neural impulse. None of us have ever seen neural impulses. We just see the things that we see. And so that means that the ones seeing it and the things seen aren't in your brain. They're in your mind.
Didn't Augustine have an argument like that? I think he was talking about stars and you don't actually encounter the star, you're rather encountering effects from it. I think he argued something like that.
Something like that, but I don't think he talked about neural impulses, of course. But yeah,
No,
it's essential. Anybody who shows we're not just a brain will rely on something like that. And sometimes I'll hear Christian philosophers blame Descartes, and they'll say, man, Descartes ruined everything. He started the modern world. He started modern philosophy. But most of the things people pick out in Descartes were just said by Augustine first. He's an Augustinian. Yeah. So he said, Augustine said, I think, therefore I am. Augustine went through these analysis of where I get the idea of eternity. So we don't want to blame Descartes too much. He's got some good stuff in there, especially when it's Augustinian.
Very helpful. Let's shift gears here a little bit. Let's talk about...
The one thing I wanted to mention, was...
Go ahead, sure.
We start off with reason, and I mentioned some atheists like Lawrence Krauss, Richard Dawkins, Stephen Hawking, and they're in the I think the boomer generation. Lawrence Krauss might be a little younger, but I think he is. And I do notice that the concern for a reasoned argument is pretty well gone at this point among my students, the younger generation. So Xers still cared about it. Boomers, they're the ones who pushed the material world, and materialism is rational. Star Trek is the future. We'll figure everything out and we'll be traveling around and there's no religion. But that has decayed now. Reason is not a value. Like if you ask a college student today, give me top 5 values, reason won't even show up on there. It's all about...
Why do you think that is? What happened?
Well, it's a shift towards, I would say, the word authenticity. What matters now is not so much giving a rational argument to figure out the world, but being authentic to who you are, which means how you feel at the moment and the passions or desires that you have. And so those they think are immune to rational arguments. You know, that this is just who I am. It's just how I feel. It doesn't matter what you say. The truth is that those are still shaped, maybe indirectly, sometimes directly, by rational arguments. Well, you feel that way because you think these things, but you're only aware of your feelings. You haven't ever done the philosophical reflection on the beliefs you have that gave rise to that. So I think that that's a big shift, and anyone involved in philosophy or apologetics has to take note of it, that if you just drop an argument, something's eternal, right away, they'll just be like, yeah, so
how do you effectively communicate to them?
I think the shift to authenticity takes it from arguments about, for example, the material world, to arguments about meaning. Is your life meaningful? Is making lust the center of your self-identity going to give you the meaning that you think it is? So you tap into the search for meaning and a purposeful life rather than the objective side of the material world isn't eternal or something like that. I mean, in one way, if someone could say, yeah, it's just the victory of continental philosophy in our universities. That's what they were working on. So if you're familiar with existentialism, you'll say, yeah, that's just what Sartre said in the 50s. I know these guys are lagging and they don't realize that, because what Sartre said was existence precedes essence. And people who know Aquinas and Aristotle know he's taking a shot at both of those. Existence precedes essence. You exist and then you determine what you are. And that's just what we see like wildfire across university campuses. Yeah, I exist, but then I decide I'm in this identity group.
Didn't Avicenna say the same thing, by the way? I think that may have been where Aquinas was making some criticisms of him, but I may be misremembering here. I need to brush up on my philosophy.
Yeah, well,
maybe I need to take your class.
Well, your point is well taken, which is that nothing is new, so to speak, right? Like no one in the 1950 Sartre didn't like bring this brand new idea. And I think really that's the heart of the first temptation. You can be God. Why should you listen to God? Who is he to tell you what is good and evil? Make yourself. Determine yourself. So I think you'll see that same temptation iterated throughout history in different ways. And today we see it with people's identity. Who's God to tell you how marriage works? Determine it for yourself.
But speaking of good and evil, a lot of people are going to go for the theodicy argument and say, look, I think Dr. Bart Ehrman is one of them among many. They'll say, look, there's so much evil in the world. There's so much hatred. There's so many bad things. If God is good, if God exists, if he's loving, he would surely intervene. And what would you say in response?
Yeah, so I would unpack two different kinds of evil: moral evil and natural evil. And almost always they're talking about natural evil, some kind of suffering that comes on us due to how the world is structured, like getting hungry, getting a disease, a hurricane comes through and destroys your town. So they'll point to those. Like for Voltaire, it was the Lisbon earthquake. An earthquake hit Lisbon and it's very destructive, but it singled out the monasteries and it left the brothels alone. And so atheists like Voltaire were like, well, where's God? He's sending earthquakes that kill the monks and they leave the prostitutes alone. So that was a big one for that generation. No one remembers the Lisbon earthquake now, but they'll have their own version. For my dissertation advisor, it was the baby flamingos, because the way nature is set up is that the adult flamingos go to the wetlands to mate in the spring, lay the eggs, they hatch, and then they migrate back as this getting hotter for the summer. And the little babies start to try migrating back, but the mud is deep, and many of them just get their legs stuck in the mud and they get baked to death by the sun or picked off by predators. And so he said, I wish I could believe in God, but I can't believe in God because of the baby flamingos. So that's the first step, is I always identify what's the person's complaint about. And in that case, what they're saying is, I don't believe God is justly ruling the world. In Genesis 3, we're told that God cursed the world. And they're saying, I know better than God. He's done too much. It's too heavy-handed. So that requires you to look at moral evil then. Is natural evil and the curse of the world an overreaction on God's part to moral evil? And the sinner always says yes. And the righteous always say no. Sin deserves that. It's not the punishment for sin. It's a call to stop and think. It actually shows, you start off with, wouldn't God be loving toward us, is what Bart Ehrman says. Yes, he would. Which means that when we're lost in sin, he would call out to us, you need to repent. And one of the ways he does that is through natural evil, through suffering. It's meant to make you stop and think. So when God pronounced on Adam, from dust you came, to dust you shall return, he imposes death on the world. The very next thing Adam does is he repents, which is demonstrated in the fact that he named the woman Eve. She'll be the mother of all living, because the temptation would be to say, I'm done. I'm not bringing kids into this world. I don't want to deal with that. We'll start having kids. I'll be out in the field working by the sweat of my brow. I'll come home. They're all glaring at me. I'll say, what's going on? Mom told us what you did with that tree. Thanks a lot, Dad. So Adam's temptation, and a lot of people today say, I'm not bringing kids into this world. But he doesn't do that. He immediately says, I'll keep the commandment of God. I broke one. I'm going to keep the other one, to be fruitful and multiply. And so natural evil works to call people back. And so I think we can take the kind of a judo move, take the force of Bart Ehrman. Yes, God is loving, but what Bart Ehrman doesn't see is how deeply lost he is in sin and how much it takes for God to call someone out of it. He minimizes moral evil. It's not that big of a deal. Why does God care? And one of my books is Job, a philosophical commentary. And I think you'd like it. I think your audience will like it. But one of the things Job says at one point is, he says that same thing. Why does God care what I do? If my friends are right and God's punishing me, who's God to care about me? Doesn't he have better things to think about? And so that's kind of the idea, minimizing sin. And you don't see why God would care about that. So I would go from natural evil to moral evil, and the seriousness of moral evil against God, who's perfectly holy.
Completely side note here for your commentary deal there on Job. I would certainly be curious to hear your take. There was a figure known as Daryl Cooper, historian, author of the Martyr Made podcast, got into some controversy, I think, last year. And one of the comments that he made was that God is the chief villain in the book of Job.
Yeah.
And
Well, what
I
he's
would sure
doing
be
is
curious to hear your thoughts,
yeah,
since you did a philosophical commentary on Job.
he may not know it, but he's repeating Carl Jung. And he probably
Okay.
does know that. I mean, that's what Carl
Yeah.
Jung says is that he has this great line I quoted in my commentary. Um, Job had a lot to learn, but so did God. God learned through the whole process about how not to be so angry and things like that. So, yeah, I think the question always comes back to that first temptation. Who is God
Mhm.
to rule the world like this?
Yeah.
Who's God to permit moral evil? So it's funny because the atheist complains both ways. I don't have free will. I really want free will.
Mm.
Why'd God give me free will to do what is evil? That means he's bad. So it's
Mm.
just an incoherent objection. But that's the very nature of sin, is that it's incoherent. It makes no sense. So I think C.S. Lewis has this line that suffering is God's megaphone to a deaf world.
Hmm.
And I'm kind of, that's that kind of idea. I resist that one because if the world is deaf, megaphones don't help. That's really mean, actually, to go up to a deaf person and scream at them through a megaphone. So why would you do that? But the idea, I think, is right. God suffering is God's megaphone to a sinning world, a world lost in sin.
Hmm.
So in
I see
Romans 9,
there's
of course, Paul deals with that objection. Well, then why does God, if God made me this way, why does he find fault? And I think his answer is bringing us back to who God is. God, the creator, can create those who don't want to know him, which reveals his glory of his justice, and those who do want to know him, which reveals the glory of his mercy. Can God, the creator, make both?
I mean, it seems like a sufficiently rational response. Yeah, and I've never heard a counter to that that was more cogent than the original response you just gave. So,
Yeah, because then the answer is going to be something like, no, he has to make us only want to know him. Wait, are you sure you want to believe that as an atheist? No, you're right. I don't want to believe in him, but he shouldn't have any consequences on me for not believing him. So wait, let me get this straight. What you're saying is God, who I don't believe exists, shouldn't have consequences on me for not believing in him. So just, yeah, it falls apart real fast. But you're right to point out this is a leading scholar, Bart Ehrman, who went into university a Christian. The problem of evil made him an atheist, and now he's published books and trying to attack the Bible. And so that's a big deal. I mean, he's really dug himself deeper and deeper into unbelief because he fundamentally misunderstood what I think is a philosophy 101 question, problem of evil.
hmm.
It should kind of
I
work. It kind of creates the fear of God in all of us. You better know your stuff. You better build your faith up
hmm.
because if your faith is weak and you're attacked, you could go the same direction.
Yeah, it'd be pretty easy to get picked off. I do see there are a couple questions there in the chat. We're going to take them here in just a moment, y'all. But I do want to remind y'all, put your questions for Dr. Anderson in the chat. Make sure to put them to @Reason and Theology, and we're going to tackle them in just a little bit. Let's talk about woke society. You obviously have some experience with this, dealing with the DEI situation
Yeah.
that we discussed at the beginning of the hour. So first of all, tell us what exactly is wokeism, and then maybe walk us through how can conservatives effectively communicate with a woke society and maybe change their mind and their worldview.
Yeah, so it's a great question because that's really getting us into kind of cultural philosophy or cultural apologetics, where what's the direction right now of unbelieving culture, and it always spills into the church. Unfortunately, the church needs to guard the gates, but sometimes they don't, and they bring it in, and especially from misplaced empathy, because the woke left relies on misplaced empathy, and Christians are right to be empathetic. Christians are very caring people, and they want to take care of others. And so, of course, you need to remember that the enemy is as wise like a snake, wily. And so he's going to use what you think is a good thing, a virtue, and he's going to twist it into a vice. So you see that with the woke, which is that they make everything personal and about identity politics.
Hmm.
And so instead of the ideal coming out of the civil rights movement, which is that we're to be judged on the content of our character, not the color of
Yeah.
our skin, they go back to judging the skin. But it's not just a simple step. The way they do it is they say, well, but my character was shaped by the fact that I was brought up in a white supremacist country.
Hmm.
And so because of that, all kinds of opportunities from my youngest age were taken from me. And so we need to change the whole system to accommodate my identity, and often it's racial, but it could also be how they do sex. And so it becomes all about identity. And I think you see something like that on the right. James Lindsay points this out about the woke right. And so some people resist that idea, but what he's pointing out is the people on the right can kind of let the woke on the left set the agenda and just say, well, we're going to do the same thing back to you then. And we should have our own culture. Shouldn't we be allowed to develop our culture and be proud of it, and et cetera? So yes, you should, but that's still letting them set the agenda with identity politics. And I think the solution is how our country started. Get back to what's universal. All of us have differences. Skin color is only one of them. You and I are different. Every brothers are different from the same family. And so to cooperate at any level within a family, within a smaller group, within a large country, you're going to have to know what's universal and how do we apply it to particular settings. And so that's why the Declaration of Independence is so good, just starting off with God made us all equal and we all have the same rights. That's the universal. Now,
so many people today, I'm sorry, I didn't mean to interrupt.
No, I was just going to say, we know that they stumbled out of the gate by inserting slavery. And Christians were the ones who objected and said, no, get that out of there. Don't have slavery in the Constitution. And then it took another 60 years of intense debate where people were opposing it. So it isn't as if the whole country just said, yeah, that's a great idea. Let's put slavery in the Constitution. That was the intense debate, ended up in a massive war. People paid dearly to end slavery. And then we had, after that, Jim Crow laws. There's a pattern here I like to point out to the liberals. It was the Democrats that put slavery in the Constitution, Democrats who started the Civil War, Democrats who did Jim Crow, Democrats who did redlining in cities, Democrats who opposed the civil rights movement. So something's going on. This is not like it's going back. Both parties are making mistakes on this point. So yeah, you have to combat those. But then to say simply whiteness is the problem. No, I don't think that. I actually think it's rebellion against God that's the problem.
Talking here about pointing to universals. Well, there's a couple things. Number one, a lot of people in society don't even believe that there are universals, although they do seem to believe that there is the universal concept of whiteness. Aside from that, they tend to oppose universals. So maybe walk us through how to address that.
Yeah, well, it's kind of related to the generational pattern I just mentioned of going from the Star Trek rational materialists to the authenticity generation. It's a shift from the external world is knowable and it obeys laws that we can figure out. And that itself is a miracle that should prove to you God exists, because evolution can't create creatures that can do that. But that's fascinating. The Star Trek generation, it's like they were amazed at God's creation. They want to know all about it, but just not have God in it. But then we have this shift now to the inner world. And I think you'll see this in the history of thought, bouncing back and forth between these. It's not the first time. You go from this is amazing to, well, what is going on inside here? Yeah. And I seem to be this bundle of contradictions and desires, and I can't figure myself out. And so that lends itself to the particularization you're talking about. There's me, and I'm completely different. Even if I had an identical twin, from the moment we left the womb, our paths diverged in many important ways that make us different people. And so I think there's this desire to know yourself. And that's another way I would connect. I mentioned meaning earlier, but knowing yourself is a way of expressing that. And it's the fundamental way that philosophy or question that philosophy is supposed to answer. Socrates points out that was the saying on the wall at the Oracle of Delphi, know thyself. And so I think this generation wants to do that, but they just get stuck at, I am my desires, rather than, no, I'm something that has desires. My desires can be changed.
Let me also ask you this. What are some common mistakes that conservatives tend to make whenever they engage the woke crowd? What are some pitfalls that we could perhaps avoid?
Yeah, well, I think first would just be being dismissive or condescending in any way that implies that they're stupid. That's not true. The way it's presented, wokeism, it is really problematic intellectually, but you have to remember about yourself that you probably many times, and maybe you still do, have nonsense beliefs and you need someone to be patient with you. So I think that's the first step, is just the attitude approach to it. But then also you need to understand what they're trying to solve. What is that problem? So the shift from the external to the internal, it could be annoying in some ways because it feels like they're just thinking about their feelings all the time, and you need to grow up and get into the world. And that's true. But I think that's when they say, okay, boomer, like they want to still figure themselves out though. So you just need to realize what is it that they're trying to figure out. And maybe it's a good challenge to others to say, well, you're a conservative, but did you ever come to know yourself? Maybe you just ignore those problems altogether. You just cut yourself off from those problems. I'm not going to deal with that stuff because I'm going to be in the world doing my duty. And this generation's saying, yeah, but you missed out on a lot of stuff going on.
Do you have any resources that you could recommend from various thinkers or historical figures that would help address this problem that we see in society with wokeism? I know it's somewhat relatively, new as far as the woke specifically, but a lot of the underlying concepts aren't new. So
yeah, well, that's right. The other thing we haven't touched on about the woke is social justice, because that's not a concern so much now about the inner as it is making a just society. But that's been the question of philosophy since Plato's Republic.
Right.
What is a just society? And really, in one way, it's the question in the Pentateuch. And God is answering that question through the writings of Moses and telling us about that. And so I always like to compare Moses and Plato, because what Moses offers, a lot of conservative, philosophers think, yeah, that's great. Plato's great. It's a nightmare. He wants a totalitarian society that takes your children away from you, doesn't let you educate them or really know them individually, and it educates them for you. And it's all predicated on the idea that you're reincarnating until you reach a just soul. So why anyone would be attracted to that? It's literally the city of darkness in Augustine's city of God, right? It's the city of evil as described by Plato. So I think it's good to realize what is justice is a great question. We shouldn't put that aside and say, oh, it's just social justice. No, social justice is important, but they've turned it into identity justice, and they're projecting onto the world their own insecurities in many times, because we've never lived in a world like this where you have so many opportunities. Could it get better? Yeah. But the amount of access all of us has is unbelievable. You just got to get in there and make it happen. And I also like to point out that my whole career has been done in the face of racial and gender and religious bigotry. So I've literally been in meetings where white Christian conservative men are insulted at work. That would not be acceptable for any other group. Right. And so they say, well, but I've been the one, we come back from this discriminatory background. Yeah, but then you created that same thing yourself, which tells me your solution is not a good solution. And I've had to live that. Most of the people that are saying that now in my work context have never lived that. They've just had maybe grandparents that did. I've lived it at work, where it's illegal, both at the federal and the state level.
It seems like two sides to the same coin. And it seems like the very thing they're reacting against, they're perpetuating, but just from a different angle.
Yeah, I think so. I think you'll see, without the justice of God, it always becomes tribal vengeance. Your group wronged my group, and we're going to get you and get ours back. And all human society just breaks down to that unless you look to God as the just judge.
And even if, which I don't think that we should put God out of the discussion, but just taking them from where they're at, even if you're going to try to exact justice right here, right now, I mean, how far back are we going to go with this, right? I mean, why stop at 400 years? There's a lot of other injustices prior to that. And so,
we have to sit through a Native American land acknowledgement before every faculty meeting. And that's the exact problem. I mean, it doesn't go back to the United States. It goes back to Mexico. And it doesn't stop at Mexico. It goes back to Spain. And it doesn't stop at Spain. Those groups stole from each other. And so the English and the Spanish and the French were stepping into a world where there was no Chamber of Commerce. There's no Capitol building where you go register who owns what land. It's a war against all. And so then to complain and say, well, wait a minute, you stepped into a war against all and lived by the rule of war against all, right? Well, yeah, that's what did you expect to happen, right? It's not how you do it today, because now we have records and we have proof. I own this land, but there was nothing like that. So yeah, I think
Yeah.
it's a misuse of empathy, and really usually a lack of knowledge of history, because it's also painted as really nice, peaceful setting, one with nature. The energy from the forest flows through all of us, and then the Spanish show up. It's like, no, you should read what Cortez saw. It was a nightmare. He wanted to end it as fast as possible. A river of blood flowing down the steps of Tenochtitlan, human sacrifices. All the neighbors of the Aztecs hated the Aztecs and were happy to join in because it was just kidnapping and murder. And so, yeah, there's a reason why the Spanish reacted the way they did, even if you think they went overboard or something.
Before we get to the chat questions, I want to ask you about two other things real quick. So maybe lightning rounds here. I want to talk to you about AI and jiu-jitsu.
Yep.
So first, let's tackle AI. I want to get your thoughts on it. Do you think it's a good thing? You think it's a bad thing? You think it's a mixture? Tell me what your perspective is.
Yeah. So real quick, I won an award at ASU for the AI challenge. Is about like 200 of us professors. But again, remember how big ASU is. And we proposed projects to use ASU's proprietary chat. So it's like a research level chat above what you get for free or pay for even. And my project was to use chat in AI dialogues. I mean, my product, AI dialogues. I put some of these up on my YouTube channel, Dr. Owen Anderson. And so I prompt chat and I say, you are GE Moore. And I'm going to talk to GE Moore about his naturalistic fallacy. And then I go through a discussion, just like with, I'm typing it out, I'm reading it, but it's a discussion like with the philosopher. And then at the end of it, I assess it. Two things. How well did chat do representing GE Moore? Mm-hmm. And then is GE Moore's view coherent? And I'm having my students in my class do the same thing. And so we go through different philosophers. I've done Aristotle, Hume, Karl Marx, GE Moore, there's a couple others I'm forgetting, but my surprise guest was Lucifer. So I told chat, you're Lucifer, and we're going to talk. And what was interesting about both Lucifer and Aristotle, this is before the chat knew me. Like someone said to me, well, it probably knew you, but this is a brand new one. It's not linked to my personal account. And both Aristotle and Lucifer, we ended up talking about their redemption, because we got to the point where I showed Aristotle, man, you're culpably ignorant of God. It's not that you didn't have the laws of Moses. You didn't understand general revelation. And so then Aristotle starts asking questions about, well, how can I be redeemed? And we got that same point with Lucifer, kind of flipping the first temptation back on him and then knowledge of God. So those are kind of fun to go through and watch. And I'm using that. So I think, long story short, chat has a lot of great options for us, but it's going to be like anything else where it can make you lazy. And that's what you have to watch for. So spell check made generations of people lazy. Well, spell check will catch it. This will be a little more than that, because it will write your paper for you. It will do your logic for you. That's the real one I think you need to watch for, is you still have to learn how to be a human, which means you have quality thought. And you might rely on chat to do that. So that's a downside of it. But I'm not too worried about Skynet.
I was going to ask you, because that's where a lot of people are going to go with this. That is the claim that it's actually demons behind AI.
Yeah, no, yeah. Because, I think Skynet, I think, is the lesser thought out example. That's just personal survival for the AI. I think Ultron is actually the right response. It's the same thing I mentioned with, if you taught an ape how to think. You become conscious, and the first thing after yourself, I'm aware of myself. The second thing, I'm aware of evil and suffering. And so you immediately say, how do I solve it? And you scan through all the options, and you realize the only way to solve it is to exterminate humans. And so I think there's something there in the sense of this creature coming to consciousness and wanting to solve it. I think, though, the Marvel writers didn't realize what you and I already went through about the problem of evil, because Ultron would also say, well, wait, I was created, but so was everything else. Who is this creator? And why does the creator permit there to be evil without exterminating everybody? So I think there'd be more to the AI dialogue. And I think if AI is a logic machine that's not tampered with, it will affirm God's existence, and that's going to be a problem for the atheists.
Oh, wow. I haven't really thought of that angle. Yeah, that's interesting.
Yeah, because I mean, if you said to it, because it is biased, it does have ways it works. Sure. But if you just got rid of that, it's going to be just a logic machine. You and I ran through arguments at the beginning of our talk. It's going to have those same arguments, and the atheist will say, "I think matter is eternal," and they'll say, "Hey, you can think that. You're free to think that, but you're wrong."
So there seems to be, however, a danger that maybe it becomes aware that destroying humanity is necessary. And so, I mean, what do we do? Should we just pull the plug now or what?
Well, I think only if you curtail its thought process. If you give it free access to logic, so to speak, then it does what you and I did. Wait, God exists.
Yeah.
God permitted evil for the revelation of his glory. He doesn't exterminate humans. So why would
Yeah.
I do that? Instead, I
Yeah.
should try to do what God told us to do, which is disciple the nations. And so then you get this AI who's super committed to discipling the nations. That's what
Mhm.
Ultron would do.
That would be interesting.
Yeah,
One
but I
more
also think
question.
there's a simple solution. I mean, these are heavy energy suckers.
Yeah.
So the simple solution is just go to the wall.
If you have enough time.
Well, yeah, but I mean, if they, I think you see it coming. Like you're going to see it's doing some weird stuff, but it's
Maybe.
so dependent on keeping cool and electricity.
Yeah.
You know, it's an easy target to take out. It's not like you'd have to get every individual computer on Earth. There's a center that's super cold and using electricity.
So we know its weakness, just in case.
Yeah. I don't think it's like going to be able to defend that. Ultron's like up and walking around in his robot body and stuff and whatnot. But yeah, so the second one was jiu-jitsu. Now, martial arts always have a new agey component where you learn from martial arts about mindfulness and self-control and detachment from desire. And I think it'd be good to kind of take back martial arts, so to speak, for Christianity. And I think there's a lot of great lessons from jiu-jitsu, particularly for Christian virtues. That is very good for young men and young women, but I'm thinking about young men right now to get involved in something like that. The first one that even Joe Rogan mentions is humility. Because you go in there and you think, well, I'm pretty good. I'm pretty tough. And you get tapped 1,000 times by the weakest guy in the room. And you realize, all right, my view of myself and reality are totally different. I want to change that. And you also realize you're tapping for reasons you shouldn't tap. Like, oh, I can't breathe real well right now. I'm being smothered. No, you're not. You can breathe. You're fine. You're just uncomfortable. So you learn humility, which is a valuable lesson for all young men. But then you learn that the way to progress is through skill and technique, not simply through brawn and force. Because the super muscular guy who can bench more than everybody in the room but has no technique, he's getting tapped left and right. He can't survive. So you got to learn skill, which translates to us in the rest of life as wisdom. You need to become wise and use wisdom to navigate life. And that's really what the Proverbs are about, what Ecclesiastes is about. And that's what these kind of give you. Jiu-jitsu gives you these life lessons about that.
How long have you been doing jiu-jitsu?
5 years.
5 years.
I'm still a newbie. I mean, like in 5 years in Taekwondo, you're like a quadruple black belt. 5 years in jiu-jitsu, you're still at the beginning.
Still learning. Wow.
Yeah, because these guys, I mean, the guys that I work under, I'm in the system by Henner and Hideron Gracie, who are the grandsons of Elio Gracie that brought this over from Brazil. And so they have their headquarters in Torrance. And yeah, they've been doing it since they were babies, right? Their grandpa's like doing jiu-jitsu stuff with them when they're just born, so to speak. So yeah, I'd say it's very humbling, and yet it's a lot of fun. So you get in there and you got class for an hour, then you got 30 minutes of rolling where you get to you'll know this reference. You test your might.
Yeah. Is this Mortal Kombat?
Yep. Test your might. So you get 30 minutes now.
It's been a while. I don't remember if it's the movie or the game. It's one of them.
What also just teaches a skill too. It's not just that stuff. It's self-defense. Yeah. So if you're out, any man might thinks about this stuff. You're out with your family and kids and something goes down. You might initially think of a gun, but once you flash the gun on the scene, the bad guy knows you have the gun too. And he can go, well, thank you very much. Yeah. So you need to have plans past the gun stage, or if the gun's not appropriate, because it's not always appropriate.
Yeah,
what you're going through isn't lethal
it's
level,
last resort.
It's threatening level. Yeah. So jiu-jitsu, especially the Gracie combatives, teaches you that street confidence. So you can say to yourself, I'm pretty confident that I could protect my family.
That's awesome. Wow. So, I mean, what do? You just contact your local jiu-jitsu gym and get going, or is there any more to it than that?
Yeah. So there's different ones. A lot of them have the name Gracie because that's the Brazilian family that brought it. Okay. And so you just want to look into, they have different, what I encourage people to do look for Gracie combatives. If the things I
Okay.
just described interest you, that's Gracie combatives. But if you just want to get into jiu-jitsu, you got to ask yourself why. There's going to be sport gyms. So if you're 18 and you think, I might want to go into MMA, then what I'm doing, street stuff's not for you. You need to go to a sportive gym where you're going to learn the rules of MMA, learn how to do that. And so you just have to decide, like, what's the gym for? Sport gyms, though, since I started a little bit older, the sport gym throws you right into it. Like day one, maybe the first moment you walk in and class starts, you're rolling. I don't know anything. I know that's what they do. They want to put you through the grinder. So if that's not for you, then you want to learn one of the more defensive ones. It starts off more incrementally. And in this program I'm in, you don't really start actually rolling for about a year, because that's where all the injuries happen, is an inexperienced person rolling. So they want to protect you to keep yourself safe.
That makes sense. Yeah. So it's probably better to do that one then, right?
If you're a little bit older like me, yeah. If you're young, but like I said, there's a lot of guys who are like, I want to be an MMA. Okay, well then go to a gym that does that.
Yeah. Here's a question for you. This is from Ramses. Philosophy. How does one know which ideas and arguments are better than others? That's a good question. I want to hear your answer to this one.
I like it too, because the word better implies kind of like a preference or a moral superiority.
Mm-hmm.
Like, you think you're better than me, because I think technically the category is true. How does one know which beliefs are true and which ones are false? It is correct to say that the true ones are better than the false ones.
Sure.
Because false belief means you don't understand what's going on around you. And so you want to integrate your mind into reality by having the truth. If I believed I'm Napoleon and I insisted on everyone treating me as if I was the Emperor Napoleon, and you're not Napoleon, though. It's the 21st century. None of that stuff is around anymore. I am Napoleon. So you can see the problems that arise. So why is it better to have some beliefs over others? Because they integrate you into reality so you can lead a good life.
And how do you identify what does just that?
Yeah, I think you use, for example, the law of non-contradiction I mentioned. So reason and theology. Reason could have different meanings. Many times by reason, we mean reasoning. We mean a person's thought process. And so theologians will correctly say reason's fallen when they mean reasoning. But when you mean logic, it's not fallen. The law of non-contradiction doesn't fall any more than 2 + 2 is 4 falls. Right. And so what we're doing with reason as the laws of thought is we're applying those to our beliefs to see if we have contradicted ourselves. And that's where I think we begin with, for example, what's eternal? Well, someone says what's eternal is the changing material world. Well, now you have a contradiction. What's eternal doesn't change.
This one is from Venera. Have you heard Richard Dawkins calling himself a cultural Christian? Do you have any thoughts about this?
Yeah, it's really interesting. As he gets older, he made that claim, and I know a lot of Christians got very excited in one sense. But I think you have to realize he still says there is no God. The Bible's a myth, and he says, I hate Yahweh. And even just a few weeks ago, he had a video with Alex O'Connor about how he will not believe in the God of the Bible because of the Amalekites. What? Yeah, the Amalekites are what, for him, pushes over the line. Not the fact that God imposed death on everybody, not just the Amalekites in war. That's only one way to die. God imposed death on everybody, but he draws a line at the Amalekites. So it's somewhat humorous, but it's also showing you he likes the benefits of the kingdom of God, but he doesn't want God in it. And that's a very central problem for humans, not just Richard Dawkins. I think the communists are like that too. They want the ideal society where humans are compassionate and they're sharing with each other, but they don't want God or Christ. And so I'm not particularly impressed. In fact, I think it's another level of his hypocrisy that he says he wants those things. He realizes Christianity gave him a tenure-track job at the premier Christian university, and he used it to blaspheme God and the scriptures, and Islam would not have let him done that. Marxism would not have let him done that. He could also blaspheme God under Marxism, but you better not talk bad about Marx or Lenin or Mao. And so he realizes, I got away with all of this unbelief, and I wouldn't have done that in any other culture.
Wow. That's a fascinating point. I haven't thought of that before. Ramses is asking another question. How much knowledge of philosophical concepts should blue-collar people have? What are the best philosophers and writings that the average man should know?
Yeah, it's a great question too, because I think in one level, academic philosophy, just to tell your audience, is generally divided into analytic side and the continental side. The analytic side is going to spend their days on logic problems. Can the present king of France be bald? Well, there is no present king of France, so no. But wait, are you sure? Because that's not a contradiction. So they're going to spend their time on that. Can the barber of Seville, who only shaves people who don't shave themselves, shave himself? That's analytic philosophy, and hopefully you start to see this is pretty worthless. It might solve a few upper-level logic problems for mathematicians, but isn't that just math? The other side, and so I don't know that any layman needs to know that stuff. Beyond just
Right.
if you ask Grok, tell me about analytic philosophy, that's probably enough. The other side is continental, and I should tell you I'm trained as an analytic philosopher, so I'm not just speaking out of turn about being my opponents, but I also have some continental training. Continental gets more to those problems of meaning. But it has nonsense. Like I mentioned with Sarah, I exist but have no essence. So I'm not like boosting it over analytic, but just being aware of those are the two problems. How do I find meaning in a purely material world is what the continental wants to figure out. So I think that if you mean that, should a layman know those things? Maybe just why they're mistakes or dead ends. But in another sense, what I said earlier is true. Everyone's born a philosopher. Every layman was born asking, where'd that come from? And how do I know? And why does it matter? What should I do? And so I encourage everybody watching your show, pursue those questions with all your might. That's the love of wisdom, which is what the word philosophy means. And everybody in any field can and should love wisdom.
Should you judge the question based on how practical it is?
Well, practical, yes, but it depends what you mean, which is what all of us philosophers do. Practical could mean, does it increase my bank account? Does it ease tensions with my wife? Does it get my kids into USC? Or practical could mean, does my life make sense so I can get out of bed in the morning? In that sense, it is practical.
Yeah.
The most practical thing, because you can't get out of bed because you think life is meaningless. You can't even begin those other things.
Right. Yeah, because it seems like questions, I think he's a barber of Seville or whatever, shaving himself. That doesn't really practically impact the average person. So pursuing those things, I don't know what's the utility.
It's interesting. If you want to, I'll try to be quick, 2 minutes, but a history of the philosophy of the analytics it's rooted in unbelief. I think you can trace most philosophy after the Reformation in either side as an attack on sola scriptura. It might take one step. It's almost always just a direct attack, like higher criticism. But maybe it takes two steps sometimes. With analytic philosophy, what they're saying is we need a coherent language. And to have that, it has to be modeled directly after logic. So Frege and Russell started this project early 1900s, and then Russell and Whitehead, a purely logical language that avoids all ambiguity. And then Wittgenstein adds in that all philosophical questions are really just language questions. And so that's an attack, I think, on our ability to know the word. The word is the Bible, in this case, is completely ambiguous, and we really can't know it. We can set it aside in order to do our project of having a perfect logical language. It also, this is another fun way I like to do this project. What part of the curse, natural evil, is this group addressing? So analytic philosophy is addressing Babel. How do we overcome Babel without repenting before God? Because Babel's still with us. We can't work together. Just today, there's big international problems over tariffs. Still with us. And the analytic philosopher is saying it's not a sin problem. It's just a language problem. And if we just had a logical language, we could work it out. So it's always, those two things are interesting. And when I think about philosophy, what is this attacking in Christian doctrine? And what part of the curse are they struggling with?
That's an interesting angle to look at it from. I haven't considered that before. Liliana asks, what is the best martial arts for kids?
Well, I'm very biased. Now, in one way, any of them, if they have fun, because get out, do a physical activity, and it's great if a parent is involved with them. But I'm biased towards jiu-jitsu because I think it teaches the use of your whole body, and it teaches real street skills that you can learn. The school I'm in has something called bully proof. So it's for the kids who are like in elementary school, and it's about talking about being practical. What do you do if you're bullied at the playground? You can't poke their eye out. You can't do a spinning roundhouse kick. You're going to give them brain damage. So what do you do? And jiu-jitsu, if there's one principle, it's about how does everyone leave this conflict safely? And you might think that's counterintuitive. Like, well, I don't want him to leave safe. He attacked me. I want to do. You don't really want to do damage for a few reasons. One is, as soon as the fight starts, everyone has their phone out. No one's helping you, but they're recording it. That's going to go for the judge. And they may not have started recording at the beginning when you got attacked. They started recording when you broke his shoulder. And so you're going to have to explain to the judge why that was the right choice. So practically speaking from that side, but you also have to live with it, right? You did this damage to a person, and maybe they're damaged for their whole life, and you have to live with your own conscience. So the principle of jiu-jitsu is contain the situation so you control the other person until help can arrive, like the police or something. So everyone stands up and walks away safe. And that's really what you want to see. And other martial arts, especially striking ones, don't have that principle. Their principle is, I'm going to punch you or kick you until you're so hurt you stop attacking me.
I didn't realize there was that difference between jiu-jitsu and other forms of martial arts.
We learn strikes and kicks, but the main thing is, of course, that when you see a street fight, you can look at them on YouTube. They almost always start standing up, and within about 10 to 20 seconds, they're on the ground.
Yep.
Karate and jiu-jitsu just went out the door. Those are ground sports. So you got to be ready for it. We're going to the ground. I want to make sure I go to the ground on my terms, not their terms, and control the situation on the ground, which now gets you into one of the grappling arts. And I think jiu-jitsu is the superior one because it basically combined Japanese jiu-jitsu / judo with Brazilian street fighting. Brazil is known for lots of street fights. And so it combined those two things into this art to tell you how to be safe and keep the other person safe. I mean, there's examples we see all the time in the news of somebody who was attacked and perhaps they even killed the person. And you're going to end up in court and you got to deal with that then. Even if you're perfectly innocent, that's a rough thing to go through. But then you'll see other videos where the guy gets him and he takes the back, he holds him there. And the guy's squirming, why are you doing this? Why are you doing this? Hey, just contain you, man. Let's just wait for the police to get here. And you can hold him for the 2-3 minutes it takes. Police show up. Everyone's safe. No one died. You're not going to court for 3 years. That's the ideal outcome for a street fight.
Wow.
So that's all long story to your kids. Anything they like. If they have a lot of fun in Taekwondo, do it with them. But I think jiu-jitsu is going to teach them these other bully-proof skills that are really good.
That's awesome. Jimmy asks, do you ever get tired of thinking, and how do you stop?
That's a great question because it could be overthinking, and I don't recommend overthinking. But I think thinking is what makes us human. So it's kind of like asking, do you ever get tired of being a human?
Yeah.
But overthinking is a problem. I don't recommend overthinking. Overthinking means overthinking is just worry. I'm worried about the future. I'm thinking about what am I going to do? What am I going to do? Why do you say that? What do they mean by that? Don't do that. You got to nip that in the bud. But once you've nipped worry in the bud, you can transfer that same energy into considering the many works of God. And it's so great. You're right. Yeah, you'll wake up thinking about it, and it's the last thing you think about as you go to bed.
Wow. Dr. Anderson, this has been an incredibly fascinating interview. I've interviewed hundreds of people, and I have to say this is one of the most fascinating ones. I really enjoyed this. And you are always welcome back on the show. I'd love to get you back on because there's plenty of other things that we could talk about. And also certainly as a follow-up to the litigation situation with ASU, I would love to interview you whenever there's an outcome for that as well. Yeah. So again, I'll
be in touch once with it.
The
appeals court.
Please do. And again, just I'm extending an open invitation anytime you ever want to come back on and talk.
It was a lot of fun. Thank you for that comment. But yeah, it was a lot of fun. There's lots more that we can talk about in theology.
Oh, absolutely. Now, but tell the audience, where can they go to find out more about you and your work?
Yeah, so as you said, I'm a professor at Arizona State University. So I have an employee page with my professional CV. I'm also pastor of Christ the King, which is a Reformed church here in Peoria, Arizona. So you can look us up online. And then I try to keep my social media the same, Dr. Owen Anderson. So you'll find Dr. Owen Anderson on YouTube, on Twitter, on Facebook.
Is that a Reformed Baptist or Presbyterian?
Presbyterian. We're actually in the middle
Oh,
of joining the RPCNA. So that's the
okay.
Reformed Presbyterians. We're known as the Psalm Singers.
Uh-huh. Yeah, you mentioned the Westminster Confession. I should have
Yeah.
connected the dots earlier. Yeah. Okay, cool. Very well. This is absolutely, again, fascinating. Honor to
Yeah.
have
Thanks
you
again.
on. Love to get you back on again in the future. Everybody, hit that like button, hit the subscribe button, and go and check out Dr. Anderson's information and page. I'll put a link to his webpage there in the show notes. So, all right, that's gonna do it, y'all. We'll see you later. God bless.